That noise. I think we should all just sit here and appreciate that for a few moments before I get on with the video. Anyway, hi guys. Welcome to the video. I'm going to go through a brief overview of the ILS, basics of it. I'm not going to get too technical, and then the basic methods of flying it. I'm going to be in this absolute beast of an aircraft today, Baron 58. Two lovely sounding 6-cylinder engines, I think they are. We've got an HSI this time, which has a few basic differences to the one in the previous video. If you haven't watched the VOR video yet, I suggest you go and have a quick look at that. The VOR video, we're using a CDI, or course deviation indicator, which is just a fixed card. Well, this one's using an HSI, or horizontal situation indicator, just in front of us there. I'll zoom in on the screen. And that one actually combines a direction indicator, or possibly a magnetically slaved direction indicator, with the course deviation indicator. So it all turns on the card and is actually a lot easier to use. And there's a few good tricks to using it on the ILS, and we'll go through those now. Okay, so let's stop the sound in the background now and just quickly go over the basics of an ILS. Now, put simply, you've got two aspects to an ILS. You've got the localizer, which is your horizontal guidance, and you've got the glide slope, which is your vertical guidance. And antenna-wise, the localizer antenna is located at the opposite end of the runway to where you're touching down. So if you use Birmingham as an example, if you're approaching on 3-3, your localizer antenna are on the past the end of runway 15 threshold. And your glide slope antennas will be located somewhere in line about beam your touchdown zone and where your precision approach path indicator lights are located, somewhere around that area. They rely on a slightly different property to VORs. They use something called difference in depth of modulation. That's all you need to know about it on this video. I can go into more depth at another point. But basically, you've got two sets of fan lines now. You've got your horizontal and your vertical guidance, and your instrument on board will give you a deviation in terms of both the vertical and the horizontal in the form of a sort of a crosshair. In terms of the scale on your instrument, so the dots of deflection on your localizer, they now equate to ½ a degree instead of the 2 degrees that you get on a VOR for 1 dot. On the glide slope, well, it's 0.14 if you're interested, but it's not quite as important as knowing the localizer. So it's a more sensitive instrument, and again, as you get closer to it, just like a VOR, it's going to get even more sensitive with the small changes you make. So you've got to be a lot more cautious on your control adjustments. Now, looking at the documentation you've got available for an ILS, we're looking at an approach plate here into Birmingham for runway 33. Important things you'll need to take away from you. Now obviously there's a lot of detail on these plates, but we're just going to brush over the main areas just to allow you to fly an ILS in a simulator. Obviously there is a lot more information there that you should take into account in real life. First of all, you'll need your frequency for the ILS, which in this case is 110.1. They are coupled glide slope and localizer, and on a lot of occasions as well you'll have a DME paired with it that's co-located with the glide slope. Now sometimes you might find a airfield has a non-co-located DME, and you have to add a conversion in your head of adding or deducting a certain amount of miles to get your actual physical distance from the touchdown point. That can be a little bit confusing and tedious at times. So you want your frequency. Remember what we said in the previous video, you want your select, identify and then display. So tune the frequency, select it, make sure you ident it, either using the audio or if it auto-idents on the particular instrument you're using, and then you can display the results. Next, you want to look on the plate at your inbound course. That will need to be set, but it might be worth mentioning at this point that actually it doesn't really matter what's set. It will always read the same deviation no matter which way you've got it turned, but that can be incredibly confusing. Obviously on the more digital based systems it does matter what you set. It will not allow you to proceed with certain approaches if you don't have the correct course inbound set. Obviously, disclaimer alert, I'm not saying you shouldn't set the inbound course. Please do it, and it will make your life a lot easier. Okay, after that we've got the decision altitude or height. Now single pilot ops, you'll be Cat 1, so on this plate you can see you can go down to 528. If you can only select tens of feet, then select it as 530. A lot of aircraft are like that. That's basically your safety net. You can fly down to there without any risk of hitting anything, and if you can't see the runway, you've got to go around. As this is a simulator, we might not follow that entirely to the letter, but we'll see how we get on. Lastly, just a couple of little tricks to help it go a little bit easier as you're flying down the ILS. I promise you I won't bore you for much longer. First of all, you need to know your max drift. It'll make your life a lot easier. So your max drift is the drift in degrees you will experience if you are 90 degrees to the wind. You use this formula. It's 60 divided by your TAS times by your wind velocity. Now the wind today in this simulation is 300 degrees at 15 knots, and I'm anticipating that we're going to be about 90 knots. Remember, at the lower levels your TAS is more or less your indicated airspeed, so you can just assume you'll be flying at 90 indicated. That's about 90 TAS. 60 over 90 is 2/3, and your wind speed is 15 knots, so nice easy maths there. You've got 10 degrees of maximum drift. Next up, how do we use that wonderful bit of information? Well, I use the 1/6 scale, and basically for every 10 degrees the wind is off your nose, I use a sixth of the drift. So if you're at 30 degrees, that's 3/6, so that's 50%. And then 60 degrees or greater, you're using all of your maximum drift. I hope you enjoy my very poorly drawn diagram to depict that. Obviously that's a rough calculation. It won't replace your trigonometry or your slide ruler calculations for accuracy, but it gives you a good rule of thumb. And let's be honest, anyone that's picking up a scientific calculator or their slide rule while they're trying to fly an approach is doing something quite questionable anyway. For our flight today, we're using runway 33 and the wind is 300 degrees. There's 30 degrees between them there, so I'm going to use half the max drift, or 5 degrees. So I'm going to need to turn towards the wind by 5 degrees when I'm making the approach to be able to track it successfully. That's roughly about 322 degrees. Don't know who can fly that accurate, maybe 320 for ease. A little bit, and I promise this is a quick one. Working out how much your vertical speed needs to be for well, this only works on a 3-degree glide slope. Obviously you could check that on your plate as well. So for a 3-degree glide slope, if you half your ground speed and then add a 0 on the end, that's how much feet per minute you need to keep yourself on that glide slope. So if we were doing 100 knots, divided by 2 is 50, add a 0, 500 feet per minute is your rate of descent. In the Barren, I'm expecting to do about a 90 knot approach speed. Now obviously the wind will affect our ground speed on that, but roughly 80 to 90 knots, let's say, it's about 400 to 450 feet per minute we need to fly down that glide slope accurately. Jump cut alert. Okay, look, we're actually flying a plane now. This makes it a bit more interesting. So, ahead of us there, just above the yoke, we've got our HSI. The inbound course is set to 327. You use the little knob on the bottom left side of the instrument, much like the course deviation indicator from the previous video. We've got the course deviation indicator set as well, which is just down and right from the HSI. And what I'm just going to do now is set the NDB at Birmingham, which just gives us a needle. It's 406. You can see it there from my Avio tab, and the needle is now pointing towards Birmingham. We're on a 90-degree cut. Now this is the first thing that makes the HSI a lot more easier to use. And you can see that my heading is straight up the HSI instrument, and it's showing the course that we've selected is exactly 90 degrees to our right. So we can use that to chase the inbound course onto the ILS. It helps to visualize it a lot better. So what else have we got here? We've got the ident on our radio, you can see already automatically says IBM, so we don't have to listen to the audio ident. It just so happens that on this as well it is sort of quiet anyway, so the audio ident is hard to read. For those that are interested though, you get the Morse code ident is displayed on your approach plate just next to the IBM. And in fact, it just so happens to be where you can see the aircraft symbol is on the plate at the moment. That's helping our situational awareness as well a little bit, and you could argue it's cheating slightly. We've got the aircraft displayed there, so I can work out when to take my heading and reduce it to that 30-degree cut that we were using on the VORs. In the lighter and smaller aircraft, the turn radius is so small you could probably get away with doing a 90-degree cut until you saw the localizer start to move. But let's just cover all bases here, and we'll talk about doing a 30-degree cut, which I'm going to do very shortly, and then reducing it when you see the localizer start to come in. Now, just as a rough figure as well, we've got our glide slope. We're sat at 2,000 feet. The glide slope, as a rule of 3 as well, should come in at about 6 miles. And if you look at the plate, it's 6.1 miles. So that's just multiply your altitude by 3 and take off a few zeros to get your mileage from 3-degree slope. Now, I'm just turning into the 30-degree cut now. I am cheating a little bit. I'm using the autopilot, but only in basic mode, so I'm just using a heading and an altitude hold. And then when we get to the point of the glide slope, I'm going to use a pitch setting on the autopilot and adjust it that way. It's just a little bit easier for me going around the cockpit like that, not trying to battle the controls at the same time. I'm cheating a little bit again. So what we're waiting for now is for the course deviation indicator to start moving in, and at that point another great trick on this HSI comes in. Just check the icing. It's still above 10 degrees, but I'm just going to put the ice protection on. Yeah, so we're waiting for that localizer to come in now, and then meters on. Then we'll start to lead the turn. Now, a great way of doing this is you can see that white line at the top of the HSI. As the deviation bar starts to come in, just chase it as they touch. So when that deviation bar starts to touch the white line, just start following it, and that's actually a very good way of just keeping yourself following the localizer until you fully capture it. And remember, we need our 5 degrees of correction when we're at 90 knots. Right now I'm flying at 125-ish. I'm going to slow down shortly to within the white arc, which obviously denotes our safe flap limiting speed. Although for the first stage of flap this might be higher, but I'm just going to take the safest option. And then I'll chuck in that first stage of approach flap and start slowing down towards our 90 knot final approach speed. Now here comes that localizer I talked about. As you can see, the two lines are touching now, so I'm going to start to bring that heading towards our final chosen heading of about 322 or 320, and then just chasing that needle until we get towards the centre. Obviously if you were hand flying this, you'd just be slowly starting the turn. Put a stage of flap now, so we're on to approach flap. Remember, with the added drag you might need to make a change with your power setting, but I wanted it to slow down further anyway, so I'm going to just bring that back further. Almost fully established now. You can see we're well within less than half a degree's deflection now, and we've got that 5-degree correction. If you see the needle very slightly out to the left or the right, then just make a correction, just add or remove a degree or so just to get it back in, and then return back to your wind corrected heading to maintain the inbound track. That's that part. Now what we're going to do is wait for the glide slope. So it should start coming in about the 7 or 8 mile mark. You can see the glide slope is actually on the left and the right of the HSI, just while I'm making small adjustments there to keep the localizer in. And yeah, it's on both sides of the central compass card, and we're just waiting for it to start moving. Good rule of thumb, and I certainly used to do this with some manual flown ILSs, is when you get to that half scale deflection, so that last line just before the central line, and you've always got to intercept from underneath, so when it's above you by that other line, get your gear and your final stage of approach flap down. That will help you slow down towards your final approach speed as you want to then go over the top and start your descent. our our ground speed is displayed on the Garmin radio. It's also displayed on our little DME readout just below the HSI. So we can follow either of those to just work out, remember, half of what you're doing on your ground speed for your rate of descent. Again, if you're high or low, just vary this by 100 or so feet per minute until you get back on it, and then go back to your data. That normally is a good figure to hang your hat on. Now I should add as well, in terms of the level of detail that I'm going into, this is just the basics of how to fly your ILS. Remember, there's other details on that plate that we haven't covered, things like approach bands and doing the hold and procedural approaches. So I've got the half scale there, gears going down. As soon as I've got 3 greens, I've just moved the yoke out of the way for that. I'll go full flap. And and now we're getting ready to start off rate of descent. So hopefully if you've anticipated it, you can just swing it over, and I'm using the pitch down setting on the autopilot just to give us a rate of descent. Now normally you could use this in approach mode, but that's not challenging at all, and certainly the best way of doing it would be to hand fly it for good practice. Remember, when your flapping gear goes down as well, you're going to want to add a little bit of power until you start your descent, and then reassess it then. Trying to maintain about 90 knots now, which is just a certain amount above our bottom of the white arc there, which is our safety lowest safe speed with flap. So that's it, we've got it set. Now we just need to keep adjusting to make sure that we maintain the localizer and the glide slope using those rough rules of thumbs that I gave you. And remember, it might not work precisely, so you might need to add further adjustments to keep yourself on it. And just jumping back a little bit there, when I had the NDB tuned in as well, you've got the needle there, you can use that to help you anticipate that 30-degree cut. Right, so we just need to turn a little bit to the right, because you can see the deviation bar's gone out to the right slightly. That should be enough, just a couple of degrees each way. Glide slope's looking good. Just fine adjustments. Remember, as you get closer to the airfield as well, it's going to need even less adjustment to get you there. You've got your distance to the field, and it's, as I say, a co-located DME with the glide slope antennas, so it'll read 0 at the touchdown point, so you can base everything on that. Usually you want to be fully set up by about 5 or 6 miles. Getting to 4 is pushing it a little bit. Certainly you want to be around your approach speed by 4 at the minimum. So lots of little adjustments, just constantly keeping yourself set on that localizer and glide slope. If you're hand flying it as well, you'll be using a lot of scanning techniques. In fact, either way, you should be using a lot of scanning techniques to monitor your attitude indicator and all your other instruments while you're flying the approach. So there is a lot of workload on this approach, especially if you're hand flying it. And that's not even going into detail of the non-precision approaches, or 2D approaches as they're now known. This is your full 3D approach, and as I say, I'm using the autopilot just to reduce my workload a little bit while I talk to you about what's going on. We're at less than a mile here, so things are going to get quite sensitive on the ILS. Make little adjustments as much as you can, and we're also approaching our decision height to or decision altitude at 530 feet. I'm not sure if I'm going to get visual before that point actually. Can't remember what I set the cloud to. So I'm making very minute adjustments just to keep ourselves on the right path and waiting to get visual with the runway. So there's 600 feet, nothing. Okay, well I should go around now, but I'll just keep going. Oh, there we go. Obviously you'd normally go around at 530 feet. I've disconnected the autopilot now, and I'm going to attempt to land the thing. Wish me luck. rudder pedals need some tweaking, I think. I'm just getting those excuses out now. There we go. Let's listen to that fine engine again. Well, that's the basics of it. If you guys have got any questions that I've missed, then feel free to give me a shout or ask them in the comments section, and we'll try and cover them. Like I say, this is just supposed to be a generalised basic introduction how an ILS actually works and some tips and tricks to actually flying it. There's a lot more detail to it than I've gone into, but I hope this has helped you out. Remember, I'd appreciate a like, a subscribe, and we hope to see you again in the next video. Cheers guys.